Okay.
I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
We are the hosts of Geek Nights. It is a podcast. If you enjoy anything that happens in this room over the next hour or so, then you're in luck because there are thousands of hours of us talking on the internet for free. If you want
With no ads.
If you want that in your ears, it's there.
And if for some reason you don't like what's going on in this room, you can leave it at any time. But while we're here, let's talk about every game ever.
Now, obviously every game isn't the same game, literally. But no, literally, every game is the same game. Obviously, this is not true in a strict sense.
Yeah, unpacking is not the same game as sumo wrestling. They are... We tried to find two games as far apart as possible. That's pretty far apart. It's far apart enough. They're not literally the same game.
Yup. But there is a reason we named the panel what we did, because you're all here, and none of you read the description. I'm confident no one read the description. You saw that title, you walked by the room, one person read the description, the rest of you just walked in.
There's still way more people in the room than there should be, so it worked.
But we are going to seriously talk about this. This is a pretty academic talk. We're going to do some math. There's going to be some factorization in a little bit. But I want to introduce a word. This is a very useful word. You will want to use this word a lot in your life. You ever have that conversation where someone says, that's not a game, that's not a game? People disagree about the definition of game.
You get some No True Scotsmans coming in there.
Yep.
You know.
So Richard Garfield, he designed a card game that some of you might have played.
That's the best one he's made.
So in a book that he and two other people wrote called Characteristics of Games, which is a fantastic textbook on how games are designed.
You can read that textbook and just not be in this room. You'd be all set.
That textbook covers about 90% of what we talk about in our talks. It's a fantastic book. But he made up a word. Making up a word is a really smart thing to do. He decided, let's make a word more specific than game, and he decided orthogame. Orthogame is talking about what a lot of people think of as games. Competitive games. Games where someone wins and loses, like Candyland or chess or ice hockey. Those are ortho games. Dungeons and Dragons is not an ortho game unless you're a sociopath.
But yeah, everything that we're going to talk about pretty much mostly applies to ortho games, but this panel actually a little bit of stuff that's not ortho games.
Yeah, but we're at least arguing that all ortho games are fundamentally the same in some very intrinsic ways. So I really want to make sure you think about what this definition is so we can be specific. An ortho game is a competition, meaning there are winners and losers, between two or more players. It can't just be you playing a game by yourself.
A solitaire game is never an ortho game.
You agree upon the rules. Like the game, if I didn't consent to playing it, it's not a game. And a method of ranking, meaning the players will be ranked in an order from who did the best to who did the worst in some fashion.
Right, so if you're just playing, I don't know, Jackbox, I mean, technically there's a winner in Jackbox, but mostly it's everyone had a good time, ha ha ha, everyone's a winner. That's not really an ortho game.
Yeah, don't play Jackbox games to win.
If you take Jackbox seriously enough to even remember who won, you have a problem.
So what we're going to talk about today is a framework. What we're trying to describe is a way of thinking about games that will help you better understand how games work, what games are, how and why games are designed the way they are, what you like and don't like about games. Frameworks are very valuable in the sciences. This is how you systematically study an area, evaluate an area, develop new theories. This is pretty serious stuff. We're talking about games, but games can be serious. And the more you pay attention to games and the more you learn about them, the more you can appreciate them, just like someone who studies cinema will have a lot of thoughts about David Lynch. Possibly more so than someone who has never thought about cinema before.
Now, there is a danger, though, right? When you expand your knowledge about a thing, right, and you start to see what's going on behind the curtain and underneath the ground level, right, the man behind the curtain is revealed, a lot of fun may be lost. Games you previously enjoyed in your ignorance and bliss, right, you may now see what the truth that lies beneath, and now you hate that game, and it sucks.
Case in point, Settlers of Catan. I used to love that game, played that game a lot. I don't make a decision playing Settlers of Catan. That game is solved as far as I'm concerned.
It's not mathematically solved the way checkers is or the way tic-tac-toe is, but effectively speaking, when we play it, it's just like,
It's like Neo looking at the Matrix. I don't see this fun game of trading. I see the dice determine who wins. Based on the layout, Scott's likely to win. That's it. Like nothing happens. No brain feelings happen. You're going to ruin games for yourselves if you follow the framework we're about to talk about. You're going to look at every game and you're going to do something that the media and journalists about games like to do, but publishers and developers and designers often hate. You're going to see every game as just a mishmash of other games.
So Pal World comes out and they say, oh yeah, you know, it's Pokemon, but it's an MMO, right? But it's also World of Warcraft and it's also this, right? The marketers, they love to sell you games as it's this game plus this other game.
Yeah,
right?
You like puppies, you like ice cream, here's ice cream puppies.
Mm-hmm. And it's like, their idea is like, hey, if we just come out with this new game that no one's ever heard of before and has no context, right? It's like, the customers are going to be like, am I going to like this? I don't know. So they say, no, it's like that thing you already like. Oh, is it? Well, I'll have to try and see. Because even though I do like that other thing, I played it so much and I got bored. I need a new thing that's the same thing, but not exactly the same thing. Did you make one? Let me go check.
Yep. And there's also like a lot of designers and publishers don't like this because it sort of minimizes the uniqueness of their game. I mean, imagine how weird it would feel if you designed a game and you were very proud of it and someone looked at it and said, that's just Settlers of Catan crossed with ice hockey. There's nothing else going on there.
Right, but they do this in a constructive way, right? They're saying their thing is these pieces combined. Right?
So I would argue this is actually a very good way for people who play games to talk about and think about games. I think this is valuable, and I think we should do this more. This is one of the best lexicons we have to talk about games. Being prescriptive and making very formal definitions of things is very hard to do, especially in modern tabletop gaming. Worker placement was invented not that long ago in the lifespan of people in this room. Video games as a concept were invented in living history. These are brand new forms of art, brand new mediums. So as a result, we're still figuring out that lexicon, and we're going to fight about the definition of the word game. So instead, we can start the way all sciences start, by being descriptive. Describe what you see, categorize, organize, and then try to figure out the rules behind the scenes and start to develop a proper scientific lexicon. So I'm going to walk you through a story. We're going to talk about two games that you might think are very different, and we're going to argue they are, in fact, in a fundamental way, the exact same game.
Mostly the same.
Yeah, well, at least this core part of them is the same. Mm-hmm. First game is a game called Nidhogg.
Who's played Nidhogg? Oh, a lot of people played Nidhogg. I remember walking in MAGFest several years ago. There was a Nidhogg tournament.
Oh, I was in that tournament.
There was a Nidhogg tournament. It was so great.
I thought I was good at Nidhogg, and I am pretty good at Nidhogg.
No, you weren't. Not compared to the...
I made it pretty far into this tournament. However, once we got to the later rounds, I couldn't even touch the guy. So how does Nidhogg work? In case you're unaware, the way Nidhogg works, you start in the center of this area, and you have a face-off. Whoever kills the other person first gets priority. You're stuck on a screen, no one can leave it. Once you get priority by killing the other player,
you have permission to go.
Yes.
Go with the yellow arrow.
And now you're playing a different game. Your mission now is to get to the next screen. You can lose priority if the other person kills you before you get to the other screen. Now they have priority and they're trying to go in the opposite direction. You will then, if you make it to the next screen, will follow the journey of someone who scores the point. There's another screen, you do the same thing. There's the final screen, you do the same thing. If you make it to the end of that screen, only then do you win. Do you actually score that point? If you go back and forth until you push it all the way over the edge, that's all for nothing. There's no score, there's nothing. It is just, you have to win a series of mini games until you get to the end and win the final mini game to get your point.
Yeah. You could push someone to the brink like 10, 11, 100 times, and then if on that 100th time they push you all the way back and hit the end, they get a point and you get nothing. It didn't matter that you killed them way more times than they killed you. It's how many, they need to do the right number in a row.
Now, a lot of you raised your hands. Nidhogg is a really exciting, tense game. It's fun to watch and fun to play. This balancing mechanism, I've seen people use a spring to describe it. You're both pulling on a spring. It's really fun. It makes a good game. So we'll talk about another game that uses the same mechanic. That game is ice hockey.
All right, we love ice hockey here at Geek Nights.
Yep, we're fans of the Rangers, which I expect.
Not a great year for us. We suck.
It was a great year until it wasn't.
We're here in Washington with the Capitals doing very well. What can we do about it? Not much.
Yep. So let's think about ice hockey. If you're unfamiliar with the game of ice hockey, the rink is divided into effectively 3 zones by these lines. The blue lines are the ones that matter. So we've got the defending zone, the neutral zone, and the attacking zone. The game starts, just like Nidhogg, with a face-off in the neutral zone. Whoever wins gets possession of the puck. They now have priority. Their goal then is to win the next game, get from the neutral zone into the attacking zone. Now they're in the attacking zone. They might lose possession and it comes back out and they got to try again. But they're in the attacking zone. But that doesn't get them anything. Then to get a point, you got to go further. While in the attacking zone, you have to score a goal. It's basically the same core mechanic. You have to win in a zone, move on to the next zone, win that zone, and then push it over the line to score. You could spend 20 minutes in a period in the offending zone, but if you don't score a goal, that 20 minutes meant nothing.
Yeah, and you could go into the other zone all you want, but you need to have that puck. You need to have priority, right? If you don't have the priority, it doesn't mean anything. You go up to the other goalie with no puck. He's like, "What are you doing over here? You should be defending."
So if you've watched ice hockey but never watched Nidhogg, they are similarly exciting for a lot of the same reasons, and thus we could start to analyze this mechanic under here, this balance beam, this spring, whatever we want to call it. There's something there that is shared between these games and can be talked about with the same language. It's doing the same thing, serving the same function, and it is likely an aspect of why both of these games are very exciting to the people who enjoy them. So now we're going to do some math. Remember factorization? Take a big number and break it up into simpler, smaller numbers until eventually you get it to all the simplest possible numbers. You take something complex and you break it down to its most core components.
Yep. We talked about how the game publishers, right, will be constructive, right? They will say their game is a combination of other games, and designers will look at other games and combine them to form new games and build upwards. As players, we are going to be deconstructive, right? We will take a game we are playing and we will examine it and break it apart into its component pieces, right? To further understand. We can't understand this big complex game that has 10 million things going on, but if you break it into its component pieces, we can say, this game is this plus this plus this. Now if I understand each of those parts, then now I can understand this big complex game.
So we're going to use a case study, a very specific example. Now, we're going to talk about some games, and if you're not familiar with them, don't worry. We're going to give you enough to go on here. So we're going to argue that Cobalt Core is just Slay the Spire crossed with FTL. And I think everyone who has played all 3 of these games is nodding along.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to get ahead of, if any of you are mathy people, I'm playing a little fast and loose with plus versus multiplication
We
here.
don't care.
Just let us have this. So Cobalt Core, if you're unfamiliar, this game, you basically have a deck of cards, and you play cards to win a battle between 2 spaceships. Like, you play a card that lets you move the ship a little bit. You play a card to shoot the guns. You play a card to, juice the engines. And you're just trying to have this sort of drive your ship around, play cards, basically a deck builder, getting ahead of ourselves there, and win the space battle.
Mm-hmm. Wizbo making an appearance.
Slay the Spire. Wizbo's a good character.
Yeah. Slay the Spire, very similar game, right? You're playing cards to just do a straightforward RPG battle. You're not really moving the ship back and forth like you are in Cobalt Core. But it's very similar, right? You have cards, you play them, you just do damage. And don't take damage also.
Yep. And of course, FTL. This is basically an RTS, where you keep using these game mechanic terms. Think about how we already talk about games. We have genres like real-time strategy game. We're already doing this naturally. We just need to explore it a little further and push it a little deeper. In FTL, you're the captain of a ship. Tell someone to go man the shields. Tell someone to put out that fire. Oh no, we've got borders. Eject them into space.
And all these games are so-called roguelikes.
Yep. So what does all that mean? If Cobalt Core is Slay the Spire times FTL, how can we factorize this? Well, first, I got to be clear, There are more aspects to these games than what we are analyzing. Slay the Spire has some other things that aren't relevant to this conversation going on in it.
We don't got all day.
Yep, FTL has other things going on. Cobalt Core has a few tweaks, like it has this story and you play with different characters. So all three of these games do have some special sauce. But in an idealized situation, and just to make my charts a lot simpler, we're going to ignore all that little special sauce. So, Slay the Spire.
Right. So Dominion, I mean, I think, was there a deck builder before Dominion? Maybe there was. But Dominion was really the first deck builder that mattered, and it's still probably the biggest deck builder. So you have Dominion, which is about the deck building, which is one mechanic of Slay the Spire. You are building a deck. And then Rogue, right? Games are called roguelikes. I don't know how many people out there have heard and maybe even used the term roguelike, not understanding that there was a game called Rogue, and it means that the game is like Rogue, right? And Rogue was a game where it procedurally generates a world and you play until you die, and then when you play again, you basically have to make a whole new world, right? And so you have these runs, and that's what defines the roguelike genre, is a game in which you sort of generate a scenario, you try to beat it, you succeed or fail. Either way, if you fail or succeed, you can't just continue. You have to start anew from the beginning each and every time.
But then add Dominion to that. Instead of playing the game by moving your little cursor around and managing an inventory, you have a deck of cards, you play from it, you play your whole hand every round, you throw it away and redraw, and you're adding cards to your deck and evolving your deck over time to play Rogue. And then Slay the Spire is just both of those mechanics happening at the same time, and Cobalt Core is basically just that. So about FTL. FTL is, now we're going, you think we're going to a certain level of depth. We're going to go so much further down this rabbit hole than you're expecting. So FTL is a blob. I'll get back to that blob in a second. And Rogue. It's a roguelike just like Slay the Spire. You pick which direction to go in the map. You have permanent death. It's the same kind of thing. But it's this mishmash here. The designers even talked about how they were inspired by being a captain on a starship in Star Trek. They were inspired by Command and Conquer and real-time strategy games specifically. They were inspired by Battlestar Galactica. But the show, someone on a bridge yelling for people to do things.
Yeah, that board game is nothing like FTL.
No, not at all. They were inspired by all this mishmash of ideas. But it's very clear that those ideas come down to, you're the captain of a ship and you have to tell your crew what to do. So you're the captain of a ship and you have to tell the crew what to do, plus Rogue is FTL. All of that with Slay the Spire is just Cobalt Core. So let's go a little deeper. What's Rogue?
Well, you can take Rogue out, right?
Yeah.
What's the name of that property called? Right? You see
Yep.
Rogue
So
on both
see,
sides. You can take it out and multiply Rogue, right? If Dominion
Yep.
plus Rogue and then Blob plus Rogue, you take the Rogue out, and now it's Rogue times Dominion plus Blob.
Yep. So
There you go. Thank you.
So thanks to the distributed property, Cobalt Core is Rogue times Dominion plus that blob. So we can go deeper. We've extracted something, though. We've extracted a mechanic. Rogue is a mechanic. Whatever that means, we have a word for it, roguelike. It's both a genre and a mechanic. So we start to give names to these things. When you get close enough to the bottom, or you find a really true pattern, we tend to naturally give them names. And the fact that those names arise is important, and we should study that. So we talk about roguelikes. We talk about deck builders. So it's very easy for an expert, someone like us who's played a lot of games, lectured on games, studies games, can say Cobalt Core is a roguelike crossed with deck building and that blob of being a captain, whatever that is. So what are roguelikes then? Well, Cobalt Core has this concept of a deck builder and has this concept of being a ship's captain, as we saw from the previous equations. Slay the Spire is a deck builder, and FTL, you are a ship captain. So these are all roguelikes. There are definitions of roguelike that are out there that people like to write. They are insufferable. They are pedantic. I think everyone who uses the word roguelike disagrees with at least some part of them. Isn't it much easier just to say that all three of these games are clearly roguelikes? Whatever roguelike is, we don't know what it is. We can't define it strictly, but we can definitely say that these three games are roguelikes, and we can prove it with math. So what about that blob? That blob is a different kind of thing. Because if we can get something down to a mechanic that has a name, that becomes a symbol that we can use in our conversations. But whenever you find a blob like that, just like in maths, when you find something irreducible, there's something special going on. There's something unique. I would argue, if you try to do this to a game and you find a blob that you can't reduce into more game mechanics, you found a new genre. Or
you either found a new genre or you found some sort of special sauce, right? It's like that is the thing that, because we said at the beginning, yeah, obviously not all games are literally the same, but every game is going to have something that is unique about it, something that is different about it, right? And so if there's something there and you say, I don't know any other games that are quite like this particular blob, this, right, whatever this is, right? I can't figure out, it's not, it can't figure out anything else that adds up to create this, whatever it is. That is what is making this game special. Maybe this game is actually has something worthwhile. If you break a game down and you find all pieces that are well known to you, I say, oh yeah, it's just these 5 pieces. We know these 5 pieces. Maybe that game isn't so exciting.
Yeah.
What does it have going for it?
The games that tend to be irreducible like this are the ones that are sort of the first, last, and best of their genre, like Chrono Trigger. I really think it is the first, last, and best of a genre. A lot of people have tried to make more things that are like Chrono Trigger. I would argue they've largely missed the mark. Even if they were good, they didn't hit that consciousness. There's no consensus that they are a spiritual successor to that game. We're not going to talk about Radical Dreamers. But Bionic Commando was a pretty irreducible game in the NES era, to the point that when Bionic Commando Rearmed came out, they made a new big Bionic Commando 3D-ish game, and they made a remake of the original, and the remake was more popular than the new game they made. There was something special going on. That arm cannon, swinging thing was special sauce. But what really is a mechanic? Mechanics are out of scope for this panel because we have I skipped ahead. We have a lecture we've given that we'll get to in a minute, but mechanics are special because mechanics can still be broken down. Even if we say something is a mechanic, we've gotten it to the point where we've given it a name like roguelike, they do go deeper because Rogue was canonically, per the creators, they were inspired by games like Colossal Cave Adventure, exploring a dungeon, exploring a cave, and Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, in Rogue, you do all the D&D things. You fight monsters in turn-based combat. You get XP. You level up. You collect loot, right? You do all the things you do in Colossal Cave. You explore a cave. I mean, you do that in D&D too sometimes.
Yep.
But, you try to find, the secrets and get to the bottom, right? So there you go.
Now, D&D, not to go even deeper, but Dungeons & Dragons is actually kind of just based on war games. Straight up war games. And there's a whole history of how D&D evolved from things like chainmail and literally Prussian war games used during wars in Prussia, but that's out of scope for this talk. So we've gone from games all the way down to game mechanics. We can say that Slay the Spire is a game where you add cards to your deck, cards cost resources, the game is turn-based, you discard your hand every turn. There is a list of mechanics. Is that the bottom, though? Just a list of mechanics. What are the mechanics in Dungeons & Dragons? Make a decision from a decision tree of what you're allowed to do in the scope of the rules of the game, roll some dice to decide if it succeeded or failed, move the story forward. Every game can always be broken down to a list of the mechanics that happen in it. These are pretty simple. I mean, turn-based games, it feels like that's one of the most atomic things you can get to. A lot of people don't even think about turn-taking as a mechanic. It's so natural to us.
That's why we tend to talk about things like roguelike, because that's what sets a game apart from another game, those really common mechanics. You don't say, yeah, this board game, it's a turn taker. It's like, yeah, most of them are turn takers except for the simultaneous turn ones. There's only 2 kinds.
I can name a game that's just a turn taker. Candyland.
Right, it's just a turn. It is just a turn taker.
Fun fact, I gave a talk, Scott didn't come to the second PAX Australia, and the talk was called Beyond Candyland, and I lost the audience for about 20 minutes until I learned nobody in Australia had ever heard of that game. That game is largely unknown outside of the United States.
That's why they're smarter than us.
So the question of what is a game mechanic, these things like taking turns, I'm just going to say, we'll share some, you can Google this later, but we gave a talk at PAX that is a full hour long just on worker placement and what that is as a mechanic. And we've got other talks on other kinds of mechanics. We don't really want to go too deep down that road, but game mechanics are a foundational and fundamental piece of games, but they are not actually the atoms of games. Game mechanics are still a layer. They're like the atoms, and we're going to be digging into the quarks now.
All right, so let's talk about Yahtzee, right? We broke down a pretty complex game, Cobalt Core, right? It's broke down into other complex games. That's how complex it was. Yahtzee's a really simple game, right? How can we possibly break down Yahtzee into smaller pieces than just to say it's Yahtzee?
To make sure, you know what Yahtzee is, right? Does anyone here not play? Okay, people are nodding.
What game is smaller than Yahtzee that you can like add together to make a Yahtzee? Right? It's almost like some non-game, right? Well, Yahtzee Junior here, right? Is this the exact same game as Yahtzee? No, it has like, the rules are simpler, right? It's for the children. The score sheet is not so complex. There's less math. You don't even need to add. You just need to be able to tell Pikachu apart from Charmander, right? But it's kind of actually is the same game, right? Because if you break these down into pieces, you break it down into the exact same pieces that regular Yahtzee is broken down into. If you made a super Yahtzee that was just regular Yahtzee more complex, it would still break down into the same pieces.
Speaking of super Yahtzee, I want to skip ahead a little bit. Roll Through the Ages, if you ever played this game, is basically just Yahtzee with a lot of extra steps.
Right, this is super Yahtzee, right? But it's still the same game because when you break it breaks down into luck, math. That's it.
Yep.
Right? Yahtzee is, are you lucky and do you understand math? And if you can do those two things, you will win at the game. And if you don't do those two things, you will lose at the game. And the luck matters more than the math. So maybe we should be like 5x luck plus 1 math, something like that, right? Whatever the is going on there.
Yep.
Right?
And you can play Yahtzee effectively perfectly. Humans can do this. I'm confident I can do it because I took a test. There was a website, I think it's long gone now, and you would just play Yahtzee on this website. And as you played it, it would show you how close to mathematical statistical perfection you were playing. Were you making the best possible decisions based on the dice you saw? And it doesn't take that much play for an average person to play Yahtzee perfectly.
Or close to perfectly.
Yeah, perfectly enough to where you're going to, if you could have won that game of Yahtzee, you will. And if you just keep rolling 1, 1, 1, 1, 2 every time because the universe hates you, well.
Because the math is something that you as a human can improve at. You can get as good at that math as you can get. The luck you have no control over whatsoever unless you cheat. So it's just, even if you're the best at Yahtzee math, you're always going to score terribly some percentage of the time because luck is what matters most. And if you're terrible at Yahtzee math and you stink at it, sometimes you're going to roll 10 Yahtzees. It's going to happen someday, and you will win a Yahtzee and get a crazy high score. Right?
Yep. But Yahtzee still is a component of so many other games. Half the tabletop games you play, you'll see a part where it's actually just Yahtzee. So it's almost like getting good at that core
If you think about
mechanic.
draw poker has a Yahtzee like inside of it, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, you have the dice and you pick some to keep and some to roll. And then draw poker, it's like, oh yes, I draw the cards and I pick some to keep. There's a piece of a Yahtzee in draw poker. And your own rummy also has, right? I keep some from my hand and I throw some out to get some other ones. All right, so here's a completely stupid game, right? In this game, someone's going to ask you some math questions, right? Just like from a math test, right? And then you're going to flip a coin 50 times. And the math questions are worth like 5 points. And the coin flips are worth a point each. And it's like, yeah, do you want to sit there and do math problems and then flip a coin 50 times? No, that doesn't sound like a fun time. It's a lot less fun than playing Yahtzee according to the rules of Yahtzee. But how is it really different from Yahtzee? It's a math test plus luck. And then we see who was the best at math and who was the luckiest today. And the same person would win both of these games. Right? So in terms of the root pieces, after you factorize both the stupid game that is unfun of just flipping a coin and you factorize Yahtzee, you arrive at the same pieces.
And these pieces are what we're going to focus on now, because these pieces are essentially, in an ortho game, because again, we're talking about ortho games, what is actually being tested? If you're going to rank the players, what is the mechanism by which you will rank them? If the game is random, you're testing luck. But if you take out luck, what's left? That is the core. Those are the real atoms of games. So this is what we're getting into now. what do we make games out of? These are the things we're going to make games out of, and there aren't that many. But we can start to explore them by looking at what we would call single ingredient games, just eating an apple as opposed to eating an apple pie.
So coin flip is a single ingredient game, right? You can't break that down into anything smaller. It's just who was luckier right now.
Yep.
Right? Or who's good at cheating with a coin. That doesn't count. No cheating. No cheating is not allowed here. Right?
But if we keep going down and we factorize a game down to all these games that each are effectively the same as a mechanic, to the point that I will just say something is a Yahtzee when I'm talking about games, then those are something that we kind of want to call prime games. They're the primordial components upon which literally all ortho games are made.
And so that's what we mean when we say every game is the same, because no matter how complex and wildly different games actually are, if there's only so many ingredients that you can make games out of, right? When you talk about food in a restaurant, like, a recipe analogy, there's so many ingredients on Earth of things that are safely edible for humans, right? Even if you just stick with one category of food, like just onions, you know how many onion varieties there are, and they do taste different, right? It's like just apple varieties, you can go wild. There's thousands and thousands of them. When it comes to games, there aren't that many ingredients. At the bottom level, there's only I don't know exactly how many. We're not going to comprehensively go over all of them.
I think we might actually be comprehensively going over all of them.
It's possible. There aren't that many. And all ortho games are made up of different proportions of these very, very limited set of ingredients that don't come in different varieties. It's not, they taste the same every time. Luck is luck, the end.
So if any of you can come up with a prime game that is not on our list, I would be actually shocked.
I wouldn't be shocked, but I'd be like, all right, add that to the list. But it wouldn't make the list big. It's still going to be maybe still single digits. I don't know. So let's talk about, they're not infinite. We talked about that already, too.
But back to so fun fact, we were supposed to do this panel at PAX West together, and then I got sick right before, so I couldn't go. So we wrote this a while ago, and we're doing it now. So I didn't remember all the slides. But
I reviewed them on the train.
But that component, what are you testing, is really important, because games that are fun for people who like competitive games are testing something interesting as opposed to the coin flip. And if you find yourself bored in a game, like, say, Monopoly, maybe because Monopoly is just testing your patience as opposed to any skill input you might have into the game.
Yeah. Well, I think that, I guess we didn't explain this, but every ortho game, remember, ortho games always have winning and losing or some method of ranking the players. And another way of saying that is that you are testing each person, right? It's like, how strong are you today? Or a 100-meter dash is how fast are you right now, right? You are testing that person's mind and their body in some fashion and assessing them according to some arbitrary value system or some arbitrary rubric. And that results of that test is what is determining the winner. And so what you are testing for, in a sense, is the same question as what is this game?
Mm-hmm. So many games are ultimately random. Randomness is the core final destination of almost every game, because most games that aren't completely perfect and have no randomness in them at any points, if there's any amount of randomness, eventually players will start to play well. They'll start to play perfectly. They fold every time in Texas Hold'em because that is literally the right thing to do. And then the only thing left that determines the winner is what cards people drew. If Scott drew a royal flush, he just wins. There's nothing I can do about that, and that's what's going to determine. You play a game like Risk, all those decisions you make don't actually matter. Once you're playing the game with reasonable proficiency, then the luck of the dice and the luck of the cards is literally all that's left. And you'll find games largely do devolve this way, but because people don't tend to play one game a lot and get that good to notice it, it usually doesn't become a problem. Like Settlers of Catan is just random if you're all good.
Right. If everyone at the table playing Settlers is like a Settlers expert, they know everything, they're tracking everything, they know how many everything's in the deck, they know the perfect strategies, then the dice rolls are going to separate who wins from who loses. Right? But if someone isn't perfect, if someone is less than perfect that day, maybe it's an off day, maybe they got distracted, or maybe they just aren't as skilled and practiced, they're going to get crushed, right? Even the luck might help them, it's possible, I guess, but Probably not, because the luck isn't that significant as it is in some other games.
Yep. And you might think, but what if I am trying to control the randomness by betting in some fashion, or I'm gambling, or I'm playing statistics? A lot of poker players.
Everyone else is doing that too.
Yep.
They're just as good at you, right? We're saying in the scenario where everyone is equally as good as humans can be.
The best poker player in the world is only playing like 1% better than the worst poker player in the world in terms of the odds in the end. Like that difference, that margin at the top is so small, the randomness is what matters in the end. So a second kind of game. How many of you have played the original Smash Brothers on the N64?
Okay.
So
what happens if two characters are the exact same character, just standing on a flat surface with no nonsense, and both characters do the exact same attack at the exact same distance,
same frame,
on the exact same frame? They push the button on the exact same frame. Two Kirbys are going to punch each other, and the punches hit on they hit at the exact same time. Which Kirby gets hit, or do they both get hit, or does nobody get hit? What happens? Does anyone know what happens?
Port priority. For the first time, someone in the crowd knew the answer to this question.
MAGFest had to know the answer to this, okay?
So in the N64, if everything is the same in this game, the game's logic says whoever's plugged into player one wins priority.
Right. It's just arbitrary. It's like, just pick a winner. It's like, it's you. Congrats, right? There wasn't any test, really. There wasn't really any luck. Right?
You're testing the manual of creation for the Nintendo 64 and this game.
Yep.
You're testing the code. But this is different from random. A lot of people will conflate randomness with arbitrariness, and they are very similar, and actually they often have the same effect, but the difference is that this is arbitrary in that it was decided in advance. It's not going to change. A player could know this by coming to this talk or watching any of the YouTube videos from people who still play the original Smash Brothers. Now, does this come up in the game that often? Not necessarily. But imagine Neo in the Matrix versus Neo in the Matrix. The two people who are at this MAGFest right now playing Smash Brothers over on the 64s. They're here every year playing Smash Brothers. They might have died 20 years ago. It's their ghosts playing this game. Those people are gonna run into port priority. And once you are that good, port priority will now be the sole determiner of who wins.
And if those people played a whole bunch of Smash games against each other over and over and over again, the person who had their controller plugged into the right port is going to win a small percentage more of those games and try to declare themselves the champion. Deservedly? Maybe not. I think you would have to play and swap the controllers each time, or write down, who, right? It's sort of like in sports. Like, hey, sometimes you're the home team. That's just kind of arbitrary, but sometimes it matters.
Yep.
Right?
The good old perfect information game, the chess, the checkers, the Go, the games where there is no randomness, there is no secrecy. Every state of the game, every change in state of the game is perfectly visible and available to all players. Nothing is hidden. You can see everything. These games are special, but perfect information games do break down pretty hard. They are always solvable. Now, solvable in a mathematical sense doesn't necessarily mean solvable with the resources we have access to on Earth in the time span of humanity.
Right. If you want to understand what solved means, right, tic-tac-toe is a mathematically solved game. It has an answer, right? It's if you go first, you can basically win or draw at the worst if you do this. And if you are going second, the best you can do is to force a draw unless the first player is really stupid and they let you win.
Yep.
But if both people are playing and understand the game and know the solution to the game, player one can win and draw at worst, and player two can always force a draw as long as they play wisely. That's the answer to the game. There's no reason to play the game. Chess has an answer like that. We just don't know what it is because chess is too big. If you made the tic-tac-toe board too big, the same thing would apply. We no longer know the answer. Go, the board is even bigger, and we still don't know the answer. But we do know there is an answer. Eventually, someday, there'll be a supercomputer, maybe if we survive that long, and it will say, aha, first player in Go actually is going to lose, or who knows what it is, right? Nobody knows. But
Now,
there is an answer.
Some fairly complex games are mathematically solved. Checkers was solved not that long ago by a supercomputer
I forget what
in Canada.
I forget what the solution is, but there is a solution to checkers.
In checkers, both players can always force a draw rather than lose, but neither player can force a win if the other player plays perfectly. So if two perfect people play checkers,
They'll always draw.
It'll always be a draw no matter what. There's no way around that.
The end.
Now, this doesn't necessarily mean a game that is solved can't be fun to play, because
You don't know the solution to checkers. You ain't going to play it perfectly.
yep. Though there is a pretty simple heuristic where you can be really good at checkers.
You can get pretty close, yeah.
But these solvable just means it's kind of the same. Now, this is where, even though we have this limited list of atoms, arguably a perfect information game is just arbitrary in perfect play. Because plugging the controller into port 1 is the same as which player went first. It usually comes down to that, which player went first.
Right. So when we say every game is the same game, right, we're saying, yes, chess, checkers, tic-tac-toe, Go, they're all the same game because they're all testing the same thing. Who went first?
Yep.
It's just who went first. You're the winner. Congrats.
Now think about that word testing again. We keep coming back to this because the test in an ortho game is the question you don't know the answer to before you play. You don't know who's going to win the game before you play it. But once you understand the game, you might know who's going to win it before you play it. At which point you don't even need to play it. Having thought of the game immediately determines the result.
Right, knowledge. So I think this is a thing that people don't sort of realize or don't recognize all the time. Sometimes it's really obvious when a game is a knowledge game, such as Trivial Pursuit or Jeopardy, right? It's just saying, do you know this? You win. You don't know it? You lose. It's very binary. It's just checking, does the person playing the game know something, right? If you do, good. But a lot of times, far too many times, this is hidden in a game. For example, Street Fighter 2 is a knowledge game. Do you know how to do a Hadouken? If you don't, you're in trouble, right? If somebody knows how to do a combo, they're going to beat you because they have, not because they may be better at strategy of fighting games and all, that sort of stuff, but just because they know something you don't know. They know how the mechanics of the game work because the game doesn't explain to you like a drive, impact, cancel, whatever the hell it is, right? And they know that stuff because they studied somewhere and now you lose because they know something, right? You go to play a MOBA and they go to the item shop and someone actually knows what all those freaking items do, even though they might be worse at clicking than you, right? They don't have these other skills that are required, but they have knowledge, and now you lose because you bought some really stupid items and have a bad build, and they just destroy you with numbers, right? That's a knowledge game. All knowledge games are the same. It's did you study the thing? And if you want to win at a knowledge game, just study whatever the heck the knowledge game is going to be asking of you. And if there's a knowledge game and you don't feel like studying it, don't bother playing because you're going to lose to people who studied that game.
Now, this overlaps a little bit with perfect information games because knowing the solution to a game could arguably be knowledge. Knowing a strategy, knowing even one chess opening. Even if you don't know anything else about chess and you're terrible at chess, if you learn the first two moves of one opening, you'll win games like 50 or 60% more often just by knowing that. So an arbitrary distinction we could make is that the difference between a solution within a game like this and a knowledge game would be, could you derive the solution from first principles within the game itself? As in, you could figure out the solution to tic-tac-toe simply by playing tic-tac-toe or by examining the rules of tic-tac-toe in detail. Whereas knowledge may be testing your knowledge of something that is external to the game in some sense. Like a trivia game is testing, what do you know about the news in the 70s, because that's how old your family's copy of Trivial Pursuit is. Sports. There are tabletop sports. You ever
Jenga?
play? Yeah, Jenga, Jungle Speed, which also has injuries.
Any of those flicking games going
Yep.
on, right? Little tiddlywinks maybe, right? Those are all sports. A sport is a game which is testing the human body's capacity in some fashion. Mm-hmm. How strong you are, how fast you are, how's your cardiovascular system, right? Something other than your brain, your knowledge, your decisions, right? Something about your muscles somewhere, right? How strong is your leg, right? How long can you hold your breath?
Yep.
Something like that makes a game a sport. And it doesn't matter how much. See, a lot of people will be like, oh, that's not a real sport because it's not testing it that hard, right? Obviously, something like what's a weightlifting, like powerlifting, is really testing your body a lot.
Yes.
And something like Counter-Strike, it's testing your body to play Counter-Strike. You have to be good at like moving your arm and aiming precisely.
And I'm over 40 now. I'm not as good at clicking on heads as I used to be. And my wrist hurts when I do it too much.
Counter-Strike has sport going on, right? If you're not good with your arm, even if you know everything there is to know about Counter-Strike, you're going to lose to someone with more precise clicking on heads abilities, even just because it's not as physically intensive and exhausting and such, doesn't make it not a sport. Right? And likewise, people who are like, oh, chess is a sport. It's like, no, it's not, because you can play chess with your eyes closed as long as you can imagine the board and without moving any muscles. You just need some way to communicate what move you're going to make, and that's it. And, you know, talking, I guess, unless it's like speed talk competition, that would be a sport. But chess, not a sport.
But a good rule
chess
of
boxing, sport.
Yeah.
A
good rule of thumb I've used, if I need to make a distinction, is would it matter if someone else took my turn for me? Or did my action for me? Would the other player say that's not fair? If someone else physically moves the chess piece for me, that cannot impact the game. But if someone else moves the hockey puck for me, they're going to do way better than I'm going to do.
Yeah, I can't even skate. So, you know, obviously all the sports are dramatically different, right, when we're, you know, examining just the world. But you can break them all down into who has the best human body, at least according to the standards of this particular sport.
Yep.
That is the question all sports are asking is, does your body meet the arbitrary criteria that this sport is asking for?
So think about factorizing a sport just like we'd factorize a game. Ice hockey is testing, you know, running plus having knives on your feet plus moving a stick around plus punching.
Plus, you know, but there's also, right, things in sports that are not just that, right? The ice hockey also has luck. The puck just bounces around and does weird shit sometimes.
Yep.
And you can't necessarily control that, at least not consciously. Sometimes you might just end up in the net. Who knows? You might slip on the ice, whatever. It also has a lot of thinking going on, right? Should I shoot it or should I pass it right now? I got to make this decision. I got to make it quick, right? Which one's the right move? One of them might be a turnover that goes into our net, and the other one might be a goal. Who knows?
And so another way to differentiate would be, if I am doing the thing, could someone else say words to me and I will be able to do that thing better? Or no amount of words will make me do that thing better? That's when you start to find the blurry line between sport and non-sport. Telling me shoot the puck harder is not going to help me unless I start also training to be able to shoot the puck harder.
Yeah, what's the chess guy's name? Max whatever? Mm-hmm. What's his name?
Oh, the champion?
Yeah. I forget his name. What's his name? Yeah, that guy. Magnus. That's right. Not Max. Magnus.
Max.
If I sit there at a chessboard and Magnus Carlsen tells me what move to make, guess what? I'm going to win. Right?
Yep.
But if I go onto the ice and Wayne Gretzky tells me what to do, I'm in trouble.
Yep.
It doesn't matter that I got Wayne Gretzky telling me what to do. That's how you know it's a sport.
I played Counter-Strike with a friend of ours a few years ago who is like pro, like he plays in leagues and like is really good at the game. And I joined a game, like a scrum, and we're gonna practice. And they're like the whole team is explaining to me, because I'm the only one who hasn't played Counter-Strike in like 5 or 6 years. Like, oh yeah, this room, here's the strategy, cover this corner, whatever. They're telling me all these strategies,
right.
and I'm really
And that will help you with parts of the game that are knowledge-based. Things you didn't, there is a knowledge component of Counter-Strike. Knowing the maps, right? That's important knowledge, right? Which guns are better, where enemies are gonna be. They can help you at those parts of the game by giving you knowledge and helping you basically win that part, that component. But the sport component, no amount of them talking is going, right? You'd have to practice.
Yep.
And
Didn't matter at all. I
died
immediately in every firefight. I never killed anyone. It was just a nightmare.
Because in Counter-Strike, the sport matters more than the knowledge.
Yep. All right. Politics. Now, not the shameful politics like what just happened in America. This is a game theory term. Politics in games is basically you will, as players, decide who wins outside of the rest of the mechanics of the game.
Yep.
An example would be like in Risk. If I just attack Scott a whole bunch in Risk, and everyone else also attacks Scott a whole bunch in Risk, Scott's going to lose no matter what strategy.
It doesn't matter. I could be the best Risk player in the history of the world. I could roll all the perfect dice every single time. I guess the perfect dice every single time. My guys would never die. But, okay, but other than that, all right, if everyone gangs up on me, it doesn't matter how much better I am at Risk than they are. I'm going to lose with all the other players ganging up on me. They have effectively just voted for me to lose the game, right? And that is what matters more than anything else in the game of Risk. And this exists, all right, in a lot of games without people realizing it. And, right, it exists in any game that is more than 2 players that is not just a race. Right? So you think about a 100-meter dash. There's 3 people, but those people don't interact in any way whatsoever. They could run their races separately, and you just see who was the fastest, right? You can't bump into each other, at least not legally, right? You can't like hit the other guy. That's not allowed. It's just a race, so it doesn't matter how many people. That is not a political game, right? There's no voting who wins in the 100-meter dash. It doesn't happen. But as soon as you have more than 2 players or more than 2 teams, right? It could just be 2 sides, but more than 2 sides, and there is any amount of interaction, right? Any amount of ability to have a shared resource or a shared space, right? Settlers of Catan, is there a lot of vote who wins in there? Not that much vote who wins, but there is vote who wins. You have more, you're gonna have 4 players, right? And you're sharing this map and you can trade resources with each other. Everyone could trade resources with me and make me win. It could happen.
You ever have a friend who trades with someone else to make them win because they're mad at you? King making?
Right. Someone could see that I'm winning the game, and let's say I'm the best at Settlers out of everybody, right? But they know that I'm the best, and they don't want me to win, so they all put their settlements to block where I'm going to go, and now I can't go anywhere effective, and now I lose like 2 points, and now I don't win the game. Vote who wins overpowered all those other components, right? It becomes a vote who wins game.
And this is specifically mechanically the way it works. The more the skill that is being tested matters, the less politics will matter. So if a game has a lot of randomness, the politics will matter more because the skill doesn't input that much. A game like Root has a little more return on skill. A skilled player, up to a point, will be able to control the outcome more despite the voting and the randomness. But imagine a game of Root where everybody's a pro. Then the game becomes arbitrary or random. And if the game is arbitrary or random, and there's all these other players, the players are going to be the ones who collectively decide who wins, and there's no way around it.
And the reason there's no vote who wins when there's only 2 sides or 2 players is because everyone's already voted at the start. I vote for me to win, you vote for you to win, there's no other voters, there's no other candidates. Something else is going to determine who actually wins. But I
suppose if I forfeit, I have voted for you to win.
I suppose that could happen, but it doesn't make it a vote who wins game.
It absolutely does not.
No.
All right. Some games are testing how much capitalism likes you.
Even if you don't live in capitalism, luckily, somehow, maybe in a different time or a different place, right? People have different capacities within society, and those capacities will give them an advantage in a game in some fashion.
We did a panel a while ago about where is the finish line, like when do games end versus when they end. Someone was determined the winner. The game doesn't end for 4 more hours because it's Monopoly. But we had a lot of talk about when does the game start. So some games, like let's say being a professional athlete, that game started when you were conceived, because genetics play a factor. It continued through your life. Were you in a rich family that sent you to trainers, or were you in a poor family that had to struggle? Those factors then affect how well you can play that sport and play that game. A lot of games are tests of wealth, ultimately, in our society. I had the privilege of learning a lot of games as a child. As a result, I'm very good at games. Not everyone gets that opportunity, and that does determine victory, and it is something that is being tested. It's sad, it sucks, but that is the reality of the world we live in. How many of you have ever played polo with horses?
That's awesome, actually.
That is awesome. I wish more people
But
could
there were rich people there, right? People who could own horses, right? Yeah, right? It wasn't with homeless people, right? So that's the thing. It's like, can you win a game of polo? Well, it's like the best polo player in the history of the world might be someone who never got the chance to even try to play polo because never saw a horse, couldn't afford a horse, was too old before they were able to ride a horse, not rich, etc.
I can tell. We have time to tell the story of the winner of the Yu-Gi-Oh tournament back at RIT.
Oh, right. That's a great story. Okay. Yu-Gi-Oh is maybe the best, at least Yu-Gi-Oh as of the year 2000, may be the best test of wealth and resources.
We're old, so give us a slack.
Right.
Here.
In the year 2000, at the game store in college, there was a Yu-Gi-Oh tournament. Of course there was. And at the Yu-Gi-Oh tournament, the game store entered an entrant, right? It wasn't a player who came and paid the entry fee. The game store put an entrant into the game. It was not a store employee. It was a bottle of vanilla Coke. And the bottle of vanilla Coke had a deck that was the god tier deck made from the store's infinite supply of Yu-Gi-Oh cards.
You know that case in the front of all those gaming stores? They just emptied that into this Yu-Gi-Oh deck.
Right, the best possible Yu-Gi-Oh deck that you could construct in the year 2000. It probably cost who knows how much money. If you could have afforded to buy the deck, you could have taken the seat away from the vanilla Coke and won the Yu-Gi-Oh tournament. I don't think it actually won because instead of it actually playing properly, it just followed like this really simple set of rules.
It actually was.
It was like a bot. Basically.
It wasn't just a bottle of vanilla Coke. It was a 20-ouncer, though, not a can. That was very important.
Very important. Very
but
important.
It had a little piece of paper with it that described what it will do on its turn.
Right. So it was a bot. If it wasn't a bot, it probably would have just won the tournament. I think it came in second.
Yep.
Right. But the point is that being good at Yu-Gi-Oh didn't matter in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh. Knowledge of Yu-Gi-Oh cards didn't matter in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh. Your ability to purchase and own Yu-Gi-Oh cards is what mattered in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh. It is a test of wealth and resources.
So, let's make up a game. Let's play Guess the Quark. If games are testing something in the world. Like we're not going to go too reductive here, but if you play a game and you're deciding this ranking, you're testing something in the world. You're testing what port the controller's plugged into. You're testing all the neurons connected in someone's brain versus the neurons in someone else's game or brain mediated by a game sitting on the table. So if you find another fundamental game that we didn't list here, that game might be some new truth about the world. It might have found some rule of logic that we haven't uncovered yet. Physics is kind of like this. Physics ultimately, like modern quantum physics, is testing the world to answer questions we don't know the answer to. And games are testing a game and the players at the table to determine the answer to a question that we don't know the answer to. Games we understand very well to where you can look at most games and know who's going to be the winner. You can play through a game to determine the winner. But think about in math the concept of a P problem versus an NP problem. Problems that can be solved, I'm going to summarize this grossly.
In polynomial time.
Yes, in polynomial time, in a reasonable amount of time with the kind of computing that exists in the world, versus problems that just can't be solved that way. You can't solve them but going through the motions. Some tests, like quantum physics, you play the game to find out the answer because there was no other way to find out the answer. And it is possible someday someone will design a game that answers a question that we didn't have a way to answer before. A game might tell you something new about the world. And that's the last one we had because we couldn't think of anything else.
Right. There might be some others out there, but yeah, basically, when we say every game is the same game, we're saying that list of prime games, luck, arbitrary, right, sport,
Yep.
right, every game that you can think of is those pieces combined and mixed in some proportion to some degree.
And those pieces make game mechanics. Those mechanics make games. Collections of those games make genres. So gamers already knew this. We figured all this out and started using these words all on our own naturally. And that's something fascinating that we are, as humans, our species is very good at figuring things out and describing them, even if we don't realize it. So the next time someone complains about using a term roguelike or breaking their game down into its parts, remind them that is a unique and powerful aspect of human sentience and that they should not denigrate it.
Okay.
So where do we take you?
We're done. Almost.
Over this hour. We have 2 minutes. We're basically at the end.
Right.
So basically, I do recommend that you try to do this to games. And we're not kidding. You're going to ruin a lot of games for yourself.
You're going to be like, oh, this game is just a sport that I'm bad at. Oh, this game is just vote who wins. Why should I play this anymore? You just guys voted for me to lose. This game isn't fun anymore.
So my advice to you, do this anyway. Because if you do this, the games that you still find fun are some of the best games in the world. and maybe I'll find more people to play Hansa Teutonica or air hockey with.
Okay.
So I hope this was enjoyable.
All right. If it was not enjoyable, or whether it was or not, tell the MAGFest staff what your opinion so that they can treat us negative or positively as is appropriate. If you want a $1 sticker and promise not to vandalize anything with it, you can come and get one.
We also have flyers, links to our website, and
We are doing more panels.
Yes, tomorrow at 9 p.m., take your freaking turn. This is a panel about why board games take so long to play and how to force your friends to go faster. Then on Saturday, me and my partner Emily are talking about the art movement that we believe exists after postmodernism that is uniquely reflected in video games. And then on Sunday, the 39
You're not
games
going to be
you
here
must
Sunday.
play.
You're going home.
It's 1 p.m. You'll be over your hangover by then.
All right. Enjoy your MAGFest. Yeah.